Welcome in this new retrospective, a retrospective on one of the most influential Hong Kong actor ever, the king of comedy, Stephen Chow, Chow Sing Chi in Cantonese. Before I start this exercise and I comment on each film of his filmography, I would like to make a preliminary observation. Quite often when we talk about Stephen Chow, there are comments about his brand of humor, his style of comedy, and that it is for foreigners and especially Westerners a comedic style which is impossible to understand. I think there is a misunderstanding there. Of course, if you are a foreigner, if you are a Westerner, you are going to miss a few jokes when it comes to Stephen Chow's comedy, especially when it is about the dialogues. There are a lot of jokes based on words. In Cantonese, obviously, and there are also a lot of references which were to the popular culture of the time, of the specific time when the films were produced. So, of course, if you are a Westerner, if you don't speak Cantonese, and if you are not aware that much of Hong Kong popular culture of the time, indeed you are going to miss a few jokes there and there. But with Stephen Chow, the thing is that the rhythm is super high. You have always new jokes like every 5 to 10 seconds. So even if you miss one there, you will be able to catch the next one, especially as with the brand of Stephen Chow comedy, which is usually called the Moleito, which is the Cantonese absurd, no sense, kind of humor, a bit in the same spirit if we want to find an American equivalency of the Zaz movies, films like Airplane, The Naked Gun, this kind of humor. And this kind of humor is extremely visual. So for the most part, I think a Western audience can perfectly understand Stephen Chow's comedy. This audience will indeed miss a few jokes there and there, but they will understand most of them, and that's really the main point there. That's really important. So if you are afraid you are not going to understand and appreciate Stephen Chow's comedy because of this cultural barrier, I think you should go for it anyway. You should give up this idea and try your chance anyway. Grab a few of his most famous, his most reputable films, and you will see if you like it. And of course, if you like, then you can go further and extend and see some lesser titles. But at least you should try with a few of his titles, in my opinion. And I think you will be able to understand most of the humor, and you will be able to appreciate his talent in comedy, and then become most likely a fan of his. So that was for my preliminary observation. Now I will start with the exercise. I will start by commenting each of the films I've seen. If there are films I haven't seen, I will move forward and go on the next title. Fortunately, when it comes to Stephen Chow, it happens that I've seen most of his films. I think I've only missed like a couple of TV movies, so no big deal. And so I will be able to cover like 95% of his filmography in this video. Of course, he has done a lot of films since the start of his career in the mid-end of 80s until nowadays, so there will be a lot of films to cover, and so this retrospective will be once again divided in 3 parts. And so in this first part, we will cover the very early films he did until the 91, 92 in this area. So the first film I will talk about is actually not a film, it's a TV movie, and it's called The Last Conflict, directed by Raymond Lee in 1988. So as I said, it's a TV movie, and it's a pretty basic story with a cop from Interpol, an American cop from Interpol, played by Donnie Yen, who is sent to Hong Kong to help get rid of some kind of a fake passport ring, and for that he's going to team up with 2 cops, and one of the cops is Stephen Chow, so 2 Hong Kong cops, obviously. Personally, I like Raymond Lee as a director, and of course, I like Stephen Chow, I like Donnie Yen in a lesser extent. So this movie should be a treat, but that's absolutely not the case, and I think the biggest responsibility lies on the format, TV movie format, because as you can expect, it's obvious that they didn't have much budget, they didn't have much shooting time, and it really shows. The photography is extremely dull, as you can expect from TV production of the time. It's like there is almost no work being done when it comes to the lighting, these kind of things. So it's very flat. And even if Raymond Lee tries to create some exciting action scenes, he actually shoots several fight scenes, fairly ambitious. There is one on a container, a moving container, so a bit the same spirit of what Stanley Tong would do much later with the China Strike Force. There is also a chase, which ends up with a bit of a stunt work. But all these ideas, which could lead indeed to some good action scenes, are really betrayed by the look of it. You can see, as I say, that he didn't have much time to shoot it, so it's done in editing mostly, and there is no real mastery in the way of shooting. I mean, you can see the stuntman did the thing in one shot, and they did it fairly safely because they could not afford, or they could not allow themselves to take any risk. So each of these ideas, good on paper, are betrayed by this TV movie format, and that's really unfortunate. When it comes to Stephen Chow and Donnie Yen, they were already at the early stage of their career. Donnie Yen had already started a few years earlier with Drunken Tai Chi, but he was still quite green back then, and it shows. Same for Stephen Chow. It's playing your average TV movie or TV series cop, so with a lot of dialogue, with a lot of relationships being developed in order to fill the running time, and so we have a lot of things going on with the dynamic with his colleague, or there are also some scenes with the daughter of the elder cop who Donnie Yen want to seduce. But there are all these are not very convincing, and it really feels like it's there in order to extend the movie, which is actually pretty long. It's almost 2 hours long. It's way too long for what it is. But so yeah, when it comes back to the performances, they are adequate, but there is really nothing much which can be said. You can't really see any special talent coming from Stephen Chow for this film, and of course especially not when it comes to comedy, because there is almost no comedy element. There is a little bit of buddy movie, a few snappy lines there and there, a few punchline, but still pretty weak. And Stephen Chow, as I say, does his job okay, but there is really nothing there which is worth digging, in my opinion, if you are a Stephen Chow fan, or if you want to start watching his films. The Last Conflict is extremely forgettable. Now I move to his first official film of this retrospective, and it is quite a poetic title, He Who Chases After the Wind, directed by Albert Lai, the same year, 1988. Once again, it's a cop movie, and we have in this film Alex Mann, who comes to the rescue of Elizabeth Lee, who is in danger because a duo of gangsters, one of them being Xing Fion, has entered our house, and it's getting critical, but fortunately Alex Mann is coming to the rescue. One of the gangsters is killed, and Xing Fion managed to escape, and of course he wants to extract revenge on the people who have caused the death of his co-worker. So Alex Mann will take the duty to protect Elizabeth Lee, who is married, but that won't prevent Alex Mann from falling in love with her, and he will have an asset in order to seduce her, which is her diary, a private diary which he has managed to get his hand on, and so he is able to get inner thoughts, and he's going to use it to his advantage. The film is, in my opinion, very influenced by My Art Is That Eternal Rose, the film directed by Patrick Tam around the same year as He Who Chases After the Wind. So that's both have this kind of poetic title, and both are actually more about the romance, the romantic story, than its a cop thriller elements. But while the Patrick Tam film is a very good film, and I really recommend you to watch it if you have the opportunity, He Who Chases After the Wind is a very weak imitation. As I said, the story really focuses on the romance between Elizabeth Lee and Alex Mann. But there are a lot of problems with this romantic relationship. First, there is absolutely no chemistry between Alex Mann and Elizabeth Lee. Elizabeth Lee is an actress I actually quite appreciate, but I have no illusion about her being the greatest actress in Hong Kong. That's really not the case. She can do a good job, I think, when she is under the direction of a good director, but that's not the case here. So she's not that brilliant here. And Alex Mann is a bit sleepwalking also there, so that doesn't help to make their love story credible in the first place. But also there are a lot of problems about the way everything happens. It's a bit of a toxic relationship actually, because Alex Mann is never honest about what his intentions, about what he's trying to do with her. He uses, as I said, his diary in order to know what she thinks, but these sequences are actually extremely tedious. So you would have a voiceover from Elizabeth Lee, of course, reading what she wrote in her diary, but it's so cliche and so boring. I mean, obviously they are trying to give a more 3D, a more full portrait of a woman, and that's a good intention, of course, but the result is extremely weak. It's mostly cliche about the conflicted desire of a woman, this kind of thing, which can be done very well, but as I said, with Albert Lai's direction and his script, it's very weak, and it's very unconvincing, this portrait of a woman. And so yeah, toxic, because Alex Mann is using this knowledge to his advantage, but on the other hand, he's never coming up as a cop, so he's pretending to be someone else, supposedly in order to be able to protect her better, but it's not very clear why it should be a better way to protect her, and actually it proves to be not that efficient during the time of the film, during the course of the film. Also, as I said, Elizabeth Lee is already married, and clearly it seems she's not very happy about her wedding, but it's not that bad. It's not a case where they are really on the brink of breaking up and divorcing. So you kind of wonder what Alex Mann is trying to do there. Is he trying to break their couple in order to be with her? But is he really a better potential boyfriend, husband, compared to the one she has? It's really unclear on that, and I think he shows himself as not a really good partner. That doesn't make this romance very appealing and very romantic the way the director clearly wants it to be. The film borrows also a bit from everywhere. As I say, there is this My Art Is That Eternal Rose vibe, but there are also other elements which are taken from other films. I'm thinking, for example, of the first time Alex Mann sees Elizabeth Lee. He actually sees her as a painting of her, and that's through this painting that he falls in love with her, which is basically the same concept than in Crying Freeman, the famous manga, which was adapted in film in Hong Kong around that time with Dragon from Russia and Killer's Romance. So obviously Crying Freeman was pretty popular in Hong Kong around that time, and so Albert Lai borrowed this idea for his film, but it's much less convincing, as I said, compared to the original material or the later adaptation, which Christophe Gans made in 1995. At the same time, we have a couple of action scenes, not that many, but which are at least decent, so that helps to make the film at least watchable to a lesser extent. The ending is a bit disappointing though, because it happened in an interesting location, which is a kind of a tram garage. I think that's the way we can describe it, and there is a good build-up. There is also an interesting, very typical Hong Kong style photography with a very sharp blue, very electric blue. They love to do these kind of things around that time, and that makes for a good effect. And so you have a good build up there. You think, oh, it's going to be a nice action scene there, but it's actually very underwhelming. It ends up very quickly, and so you are not feeling satisfied by this climax of the film, but it's actually very symbolic to the weaknesses and to the shortcoming that He Who Chases After the Wind exhibits during it's 90 minutes. Stephen Chow, what is he doing there? He's actually the teammate of Alex Mann. So he has only a supporting part, fairly small, I would say maximum 20 minutes of screen time. So he's there to bring a bit of comedy flavor to the film, but his jokes are not very funny, so it's not convincing in any way. There are even scenes which are almost shameful. I mean, there is a scene in which he's playing a mentally retarded because Elizabeth Lee has a clinic who are trying to help those kind of people. So he's pretending to be mentally retarded in order to be closer to her at the request of Alex Mann. And so he's acting as if he was himself mentally retarded, and that's really bad. I mean, it's not funny at all. It's a bit offensive. It doesn't age very well. Maybe back then it was found to be funny. I'm not even sure it was really found funny. I think it was already not very funny for the audience back then, and with more than 30 years since, it hasn't aged well at all. So not a great performance by Stephen Chow, but I don't think he's the only one to be blamed there. I mean, obviously, the script and the direction by Albert Lai are the main problems. It's an unfortunate failure, this He Who Chases After the Wind. So, as you can see, the career of Stephen Chow didn't start in the best light. These two films with The Last Conflict and this He Who Chases After the Wind. Fortunately, we are going to raise the bar a little bit with the next one, which is Final Justice, directed by Park Man-wong. So Final Justice is the Magnum production. Magnum was the production company set up by Danny Lee. Danny Lee around that time was really trying to impose his image of the number one Hong Kong cop, and he was really succeeding in that. He was really becoming the incarnation of the Hong Kong cop. And in order to have this image strengthened, he had his own production company, which was called Magnum. Probably once again a clear influence from Clint Eastwood and Dirty Harry, which he often play a variation of this kind of character. And that's the case here in Final Justice. And so Magnum produced quite a few films each year in which he was playing his favorite kind of parts, this kind of hard-boiled cop. And Final Justice is one of them. Park Man-wong, who was a supporting actor, was been a supporting actor for most of his career, was kind of the right-hand man of Danny Lee around that time, and so he was quite involved with Magnum behind the scene, and he directed a few films for Magnum, and Final Justice is one of them. So in Final Justice, as usual, we have Danny Lee as this kind of Dirty Harry, hard-boiled cop who has difficulty with his hierarchy, but will have a high sense of justice and is always ready to punish the gangsters the hard way. And in order to catch a gang of especially dangerous criminals, is going to use a small petty thief played by Stephen Chow, and is going to have him interact with the gang, and is going to use him as an informant in order to be able to catch them. So Stephen Chow is going to find himself between a hammer and an anvil, basically, and it's going to be very tough for him. Magnum films tend to be a bit standardized. You always have, of course, Danny Lee, as I said, playing the same kind of character, and you would have a few action scenes there and there, some pretty predictable cop drama with always a bit the same ingredients, and you always have those ingredients in Magnum production with some slight variations depending on who is behind the camera. It's fairly entertaining, it's perfectly watchable, but if you watch too many in a row, you will see that there is some kind of standardization process there. And so Final Justice is a good, solid Magnum production, but as I said, it lacks a bit of personality, it lacks a bit of innovation in order to be fully satisfied. If you want a decent, entertaining Hong Kong cop films, the Magnum films and Final Justice is perfectly fine to go with, but you won't have much more than that. It's obviously way below something by John Woo, something by Kirk Wong, most films which have much more grittiness or much more personality, much more style involved. Here it's, as I said, perfectly watchable, but a bit standardized and a bit bland to some extent. Having said that, the performance of Stephen Chow is interesting. That's one of his most dramatic performance in all his career, and he is very convincing. He really does a good job there, and he actually got a Golden Horse Award for his performance in Final Justice. So it was appreciated by the industry in general, here the Taiwanese industry, but in general the Hong Kong industry as well. He was recognized as a talent because of his performance for Final Justice, and it got quite a few executive, quite a few studio interested in him, and many working opportunities, even if it would not be in this style of film that he would finally find his right calling. Interestingly also, the gangsters, the gang of criminals, is like a who's who of all the most memorable villains in Hong Kong film back then. So we have Xing Fuan, we have Tommy Wong, and we also have William Ho or Kakoi. So it's quite fun to see all these very distinctive faces of Hong Kong cinema all together playing the bad guys. That's a good point for the film, and as I said, it's quite entertaining. It's really completely watchable. It's a fairly good film, and it's certainly worth, if you are exploring the career of Stephen Chow, for you to watch him in a completely dramatic setting and see that he was able to do something quite decent when he had this kind of material to deal with. Makes you wonder what could have happened in Stephen Chow's career if he had kept working in this direction. Maybe he would have been able to have some kind of solid career in the way of people like Alex Mann. Maybe not to the extent of someone like Chow Yun-fat, but this kind of actors who were used to be in this kind of action drama, I would put it this way, and he could have had a decent career in this direction. But anyway, that was not to be. And the next movie I'm going to talk about is the first comedy ever for Stephen Chow, and that's Faithfully Yours, directed by Wong Wai-kei the same year as Ibu Chases After the Wind or Final Justice, that is 1988. In Faithfully Yours, we have three friends, Stephen Chow, Jackie Chung, Max Mock, who falls in love with the same girl, the daughter of old school barber played by Richard and the daughter is being played by Chung Man. And so those three friends are all going to compete in order to get the girl in question. And that will lead to a lot of funny situations. Faithfully Yours is a mix of a lot of different elements. You have the chasing girl comedy element, which was something the Cinema City did a lot in the early 80s and which was very popular back then. And then you had films like The Lucky Star, this kind of Golden Harvest production, which took over in this style. So a band of guys who are a bit childish, who are trying to woo girls, and so you have this kind of spirit there, but you also have a little bit of chicken and duck talk. The film by Clifton Coe with Michael Hoyt, with the original King of Comedy, where you have an opposition between a very modern fast food and an old style restaurant. There is a little bit of that in the beginning of Faithfully Yours with the old style barber shop of Richard compared to the modern hairdressing salon opened by Jackie Chung. And you also have a little bit of a French comedy which was later remade in Hollywood, which is Three Men and a Baby, because at some point in the story the Chung Man got pregnant, but she doesn't know who is the father, and there is a little bit of this vibe going on in the last stage of the movie in Faithfully Yours. So as you can see, it tries to take a bit from everywhere and it tries to create something new from there. Unfortunately, it doesn't succeed in this attempt. The film is not funny, and that's really the big problem for a comedy. There are a few jokes there and there which works, but during the 90 minutes, the 95 minutes that it lasts, clearly for the most part you are not going to smile, you are not going to laugh. The comedy is pretty tedious, the story doesn't flow with the rhythm that you could expect, and the performances are fairly generic and a bit underwhelming when it comes to the comedian of the caliber such as Richard and Stephen Chow. You know they can deliver much more than what they do in Faithfully Yours, so most likely the culprit for the failure of the film is the director on the script. That's really unfortunate. In my opinion, things are even made worse because Stephen Chow is dubbed. That's the case from the previous film I've already talked about, and so that's the case here again. That's not that surprising because that was kind of the normal practice in the Hong Kong film industry back then. The actors would not be the one dubbing themselves, they would actually shoot the film without any sound and they would redub it after during the post-production process. But most of the time it would be someone else, it would be another actor who would be dubbing the original actors. And for Stephen Chow that's really a problem because he has a very specific voice which greatly contributes to the comedy aspect, and if you remove his voice and you put someone else, obviously you are missing something. That's the case also for someone like Eric Tsang. I mean, if you and actually at the beginning of his career Eric Tsang was not dubbing himself, that was another actor, so you can already witness this phenomenon, and you see there is something wrong when it's not him who is dubbing himself, and that's the case here also with Stephen Chow. You really lose something when it's not him who is having his own voice. Interestingly enough though, Faithfully Yours represent, as I said, the first comedy in Stephen Chow filmography, but it's also the first time that he would be paired with Chung Man, who would become a bit later in his career his usual partner, his usual female partner, with quite some success. But it's not really obvious that it would be like this when you watch Faithfully Yours, which, as I said, is a pretty forgettable and failure as a comedy. We enter the year 1989, and we will enter it with a bang with a film called Dragon Fight. A bang based on the casting of Dragon Fight, because we have Jet Li, we have Stephen Chow, we have Dick Wei, and we have Nina Lee. So a casting which a few years later would have been a huge one. I mean, Stephen Chow, Jet Li, just those two names were some of the biggest names from the film industry, the Hong Kong film industry of the 90s. But in 89, that was not the case. Obviously, Stephen Chow was not the comedy star that he would later become, and Jet Li was in a tough spot in his career. He had become a bit of a star thanks to the Shaolin trilogy he had done before, but then he had moved to the US, and he was a bit in a limbo. He didn't have he didn't manage to get the green card, as far as I know, and so he stayed in the US for a short time, and he didn't know exactly what he was going to do. He was a bit hesitating about his future, and so he found himself doing two Hong Kong films there during that time of doubt, and one of them was Dragon Fight, directed by Billy Tang, and the other one was The Master, directed by Chow. And those two films are fairly similar, I would say, in their few qualities and most of their defaults. First, they have a very basic story with a very limited character development, so you are never really invested in the characters, be it in The Master and be it here in a Dragon Fight. They don't really make the best use of the American location, and all this American environment, all this American vibe is actually not to the benefit of the film. That really makes it even more generic compared to what you could expect from Hong Kong film. And last point, which doesn't benefit for the film, be it The Master or Dragon Fight here, the action scenes, while decent, are nothing really outstanding, especially if you take it in the context of the time, a context during which Hong Kong film industry was able to produce some great action scenes. And they are not bad, they are quite okay, but they are not that great. I mean, they don't have this wow factor that Hong Kong film were able to provide. They are decent, certainly better than what American cinema was doing back then. But for Hong Kong film, that was just okay, just slightly above average and nothing more. The story is pretty simple. We have Jet Li and Dick Wei, who are two athletes, Chinese athletes, and they are going to the US, and Dick Wei wants to stay in the US, and so he kind of escapes surveillance, and he stays there, and he becomes involved with gangsters, and he tries to become one of the biggest gangsters, to become the biggest gangster of the place. Most of the film is shot in San Francisco, while The Master was shot mostly in Los Angeles. And so Jet Li is trying to stop him from doing that. He's trying to bring him back to mainland. And then when he realizes that he has become such a gangster, he has to stop him doing these kind of things. So that's the dynamic there. And once again, like he who chases after the wind, Stephen Chow is playing the comedy sidekick to Jet Li. He's doing okay, but there is really nothing outstanding there. Once again, I don't think he's the main culprit. He's the one really responsible for the average performance here, which is okay. Once again, it is not bad, but the film, the script is disappointing. I mean, it doesn't really do anything great or that convincingly, so he cannot save the film just by the strength of his performance. So he is doing what he's supposed to do, which is supporting comedy part. It's not very funny, it's not that bad either, it's in between, which is exactly how this film is. It's an average film. interesting based on its casting, but which fails to really fully delivers as we would like it to do. So once again, a fairly disappointing film in this early stage of Stephen Chow's career. Thankfully, in 1989, there was another film which was much better than A Dragon Fight, another dramatic action film, and that is Just Heroes, directed by John Woo on Wuma. Just Heroes was a charity film. It was made in order to finance the retirement of famous Shaw Brothers director Chang Che. Chang Che was really nearing the end of his career, and so all the people who had worked with him, all the people who were close to him, got together and decided to do a movie from which the benefits would be given to the original Shaw Brothers director, the director of films such as The One-Armed Swordsman or Vengeance or Boxer from Shantung. And so behind the camera we have two former assistants to Chang-Chi that are John Woo and Wuma. And in front of the camera we have many of the actors who had worked with him during his peak period, which are the end of the 60s, early 70s. So we have David Chiang, we have Chen Quan-tai, we have Danny Lee, we have Wuma, once again, acting in the film as well. The story of the film is fairly usual in this kind of heroic bloodshed film. So we have a political struggle in a triad. The leader of the triad is assassinated, and then there is a power struggle to know who is going to take over, and of course who is the one behind the assassination of the leader. It's fairly classical when it comes to this kind of films, but it's handled with enough care for us to be interested in what is being proposed there. The scriptwriter, at least the original scriptwriter, is Ai Hong, Nick Wong, who was the original scriptwriter for many of the most famous work by Chang-Chi during the 60s and 70s. And what is interesting in the story, in my opinion, is that we have the same kind of spirit as in his films. So Chang-Chi films, Chang-Chi martial arts films, were really all based onto the violence, of course, but also the brotherhood, the friendship between the main male characters. And at the same time, the female had a very limited presence. They were at best a flower pot, and at worst they were the cause of trouble, the cause of problems for the heroes. That was the case, for example, in Blood Brothers. And that's things that you find exactly in Just Heroes, but modernized. So exactly what was being done around that time with the heroic bloodshed trend, the hero trend, this kind of modernization of Chang-Chi martial arts films. And you find exactly this kind of concept, what made Shang-Chi films work so well. You find it also in Just Heroes, with the brotherhood between the different characters, but also the bad influence of women on these men, which can be argued. Obviously, that's not a very flattering portrayal of women, and it's a bit sexist, obviously, and it can certainly be argued against, but that's typical of Chang-Chi style, and so it makes sense to find it in Just Heroes, a movie made as a charity for Chang-Chi. Just Heroes is a bit overlooked in John Woo's career compared to Better Tomorrow, The Killer, Bullet in the Head, Hardball. That's quite understandable, because as it is a charity film, you can see it has been made with a fairly limited budget, and so he's not able to develop action scenes as outstanding, as elaborate as the other films which I've just mentioned. Having said that, I think it's still a pretty good and pretty solid heroic bloodshed film. I mean, John Woo at the time was really at the peak of his talent, and he was really the master of heroic bloodshed. So even if it is a lesser effort for him compared to the other work he had done during that time. It still has its essence and it still has its talent on the screen, and so that's still a very good film, on way at least one head above the other Heroic Bloodshed that were being made at the time. So it's still a quite recommendable film if you are interested into Heroic Bloodshed and if you like John Woo's filmography. If you are familiar also with the Hong Kong film industry, with those actors and technicians from the 60s and 70s, it's a real pleasure to watch Just Heroes, because as soon as there are scenes with a lot of characters, you will see a lot of important people, a lot of famous faces in the background. That can be the case of actors. You will see Paul Chun, for example. You will see action directors. You will see Yuen Woo-ping. You will see Tong Gai, Tang Xia. You will also see people like James Wong, famous as a composer, but was also an actor. So you will see a real who's who of Hong Kong film industry, and so that's a real pleasure when you are used to these people, when you know who they are, to see them all together on the screen. For Stephen Chow, Stephen Chow is in his dramatic style aspect, so he's more like on the Final Justice side of his movie career, of his early movie career, than films like Faithfully Yours or He Who Chases After the Wind. So he's not doing this comedy thing. He's really playing it straight. He's really playing it dramatic, and he gives a very good dramatic performance, I think, actually, especially the scene where he discovers the head of the Triad who has been killed. He is under the rain and he's crying and screaming, and he really delivers a good performance there. It's not easy because he has to deal with so many famous actors who are used to be in this kind of environment, the Chen Kuan-tai, the David Chiang, the Danny Lee. So it's not easy for him to be at the same level as these very experienced actors, but I think he managed pretty well, and he brings a bit of youthful energy compared to these older actors. So yeah, really solid performance there by Stephen Chow, one of his best with Final Justice when it comes to drama. There will be another film a bit later in which he also gives a good dramatic performance, but so you can really see that he had the tools. He was able to give some good serious performance, and in a way it's a bit sad that he was not able to develop it further, but on the other hand, otherwise we would not have the king of comedy. So I guess it's good that we have at least those early film in his career in order to see what he was able to do, another range of his talent. 1989, we also had Thunder Cops 2, directed by Jeff Lowe. Thunder Cops 2 is a weird animal. First, we have to state that it's not a sequel to Thunder Cop. It's actually a film of its own. I'm not sure what the people who did the English title were thinking about. But so don't bother trying to watch the first Thunder Cop. It has no relationship to this one. And so in this one, it's once again a cop story, and the cop in question here is Sandra Ng. Sandra Ng with a bit of a clumsy policewoman, and because of her clumsiness, she will be involved in an operation, and she will make the operation go wrong. And actually her father, who is an elder cop, is going to be killed because of that, and so she will try to extract revenge from the gangsters who are responsible for the death of her father. As I said, Thunder Cop 2 is a strange animal because it's a movie which is full of actors who are trying to change their image, and it's the same for the director Jeff Lowe, who was already known back then as a comedy director, and so he was trying to change his image as well. And the early scenes of the film are comedy, but then it quickly gets extremely serious, and it gets the complete other way by proposing a very dark film, very dramatic, very serious, where Sandra, after being this a bit clumsy policewoman, become very revenge driven, and she becomes like a hard-boiled police woman. So complete transformation. That's what makes the film interesting to watch, but that's also its shortcoming in my opinion, because in this case Sandra, who is a very good actress and who has shown that she is able to do something else than comedy, she was still a bit green there. She had already been categorized as a comedy actress, and the change of image is a bit too brutal here. It's a bit too rough. It's a bit too extreme. And so while you can see she's really doing a lot of effort and she's really trying hard, there is still something which is a bit missing in her performance to really believe that she has become this tough as nail cop. And that's a bit of a problem. You have the same thing happening, but with a more satisfying result with Anne Bridgewater. Anne Bridgewater was one of the young star of the cinema city during the mid-80s. She was a part of a group of girls called the Happy Girl, and who are this very youthful, very innocent girls. You had also Fanny Yun, you had also Loretta Lee, who were part of that. And she was trying to change her image and to become more adult, more mature in her performances. And so here she's playing a drug addict, and she has also some sex scenes, even if you don't see anything that revealing, but still a drastic change of image for her as well. And I think she actually is much more convincing than Sandra when it comes to this change. She actually gives a very good performance, very good dramatic performance. And Stephen Chow, so it's a bit the same concept here, at least when you look at it retroactively, because as you have seen from this retrospective on the early stage of Stephen Chow's career, he was not yet labeled as a comedy actor. He was doing sometime the sidekick, the comedy sidekick for more famous actors, but he was not yet seen as a Mr. Comedy. So it's not such a drastic change for him, but still the point here is that once again he's having a very serious performance to deliver as some kind of small gangster, the brother of Shin Fui-on, who is the main bad guy as usual, and he's playing it a bit like Chow Yun-fat in A Better Tomorrow. He's a bit handicapped physically, he's a bit in a tough spot, and he doesn't know how he can get back his integrity, get back his humanity. And he's doing a really good job. I mean, as I said, when he is in films like this, like in Final Justice, like in Just Heroes, when he is in this dramatic film, he's really able to deliver, and that's the case here. He is interesting to look at, partnered with Sandra, given that later on they would be often working together in comedy and with great success. But it's interesting to see both of them here, playing it straight, playing it serious, with not so much success when it comes to Sandra, unfortunately, but with a much more satisfying result for Stephen Chow. And another aspect which is interesting, as I said, is the fact that Jeff Lowe was trying to change his image as well. Jeff Lowe, the director, and he was, as I said, he's really trying very hard in it. He's trying very hard to make the film stylish, to really bring some personality in the film. and that makes for an interesting watch. There are a lot of work, a lot of care which has been put on the colors and the photography. You really see that he's trying to do something above the average Hong Kong cop drama of the time, and that makes for an interesting viewing, and that makes Thunder Cop 2 still interesting to watch nowadays, despite not really managing to deliver fully as much as it would like to do. The duo Stephen Chow Sandra would work together again the next year in 1990 with Love is Love for Tommy Leung. Love is Love is a film which has difficulty to really know what it's trying to do. So on one side we have a fairly serious relationship drama with Stephen Chow and Sandra Leung being a young married couple, and they are originally from a small village in the New Territory, and they move in the heart of the city, in the heart of Hong Kong, and so they have to adapt to this new lifestyle compared to the more laid-back way of things from their own village, and so it's hard for them, and so it will bring some difficulties in their couple. So there is all this serious relationship drama aspect, but at the same time it also tries to bring a lot of comedy. But those two aspects don't really blend together, and at the end you feel a bit frustrated with the film because it's not serious enough when it comes to the love story, when it comes to the drama, and it's not funny enough when it comes to the comedy. So it's a frustrating film to watch for the most part, despite some interesting performances from Stephen Chow and Sandra. You see that they are well paired together, that they are really able to do a good job together, but I think the main problem, once again, as it has been on some previous films I've been discussing about, it's the script and the direction by Tommy Leung, which is not really using those good actors to the best that they can deliver on. So at the end, Love is Love, despite good intentions and despite having some things to say about the life as a couple, the life as a married couple, it fails to deliver the way we would like it to. My Hero, directed by Leung Kar-yan the same year, is also a disappointment, but for other reasons. So My Hero is the second film directed by Leung Kar-yan. Leung Kar-yan, Birdie, who you are probably used to see in many kung fu films of the 70s, and who tried to do a bit more behind the scene, directing some films, and so My Hero is the second one he did. And the concept for My Hero is actually interesting because it tries to follow the trend of heroic bloodshed with a main character with a small waiter who is very influenced, who is very into comic book, and especially comic book describing gangster stories, and he will find himself involved with a triad, and he will enter in the triad, and he will rise through the ranks, but he will discover that the reality of gangsters is not the same as what is described in comic books. So this concept is interesting, and especially after all these heroic bloodshed films which had been so present the years before, and which sometimes, not always, but sometimes fell into the trap of glorifying gangsters. So this movie is like a counterpoint, or at least it wants to be a counterpoint to this kind of trend, and that's an interesting concept, I think. And you can see that Leung Kar-yan is really trying to incorporate it and to make it to make his direction dynamic through the inclusion of the comic book aspect. So sometimes he would put some inserts in some scenes to do some direct references to comic books. He would do some split screen. So there are some efforts which are being made in order to match the concept cinematically with the comic book influences, and there is also an intention of having something to say about gangsters, about criminals, and their influence based through Hong Kong pop culture at the time. Having said that, all these good intentions or efforts are not completely successful. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what gets wrong, but the film doesn't manage to deliver. It has a fairly good start, I would say, but then it gets bogged down for a good part of its length with some relationship with Anne Bridgewater, Wilson Lamb, and Stephen Chow. But it becomes very generic, unfortunately. It kind of loses its purpose and gets bogged down into conventional gangster film storylines. And that's really too bad. I mean, there was something for more in My Hero, which Lunkarian unfortunately failed to really dig, failed to really bring in the film. Maybe because the film tries to do too many things at the same time. So you have the gangster story, you have a bit of the critical aspect, which I've said, through the Hong Kong pop culture and especially comic books. You have some romance, you have some comedy as well, and I think that's probably too much for one movie. Lunkarian is not able to really concentrate on one aspect, and I think he should have been concentrating more on the critical aspect, because that's really the original concept of the film, or go maybe full comedy. But he doesn't do that. He tries to have a little bit of everything at the same time, and because of that, it doesn't really manage to deliver the way you want it. It's not that funny, it's not that exciting as a gangster film, it's not that sharp as a critic of the Hong Kong pop culture or the Hong Kong film industry, or some other influential entertainment and industry back then. So at the end, it's a movie which is a bit frustrating. Stephen Chow is trapped in the same problem. I mean, he has to do a little bit of everything, and so at the end he cannot really deliver as much in any of them. And so at the end, as I said, My Hero is a little bit frustrating. It's not a bad movie. I mean, I would put it more like the average film. It's still watchable. It's nothing great, and it will be mostly frustrating because you can see the potential, but it's still watchable enough. It's just quite a frustrating experience. 1990 is actually quite a busy year for Stephen Chow, so we will move to the next one quickly, which is Lung Fung Restaurant, directed by Poon Man Kit. Lung Fung Restaurant is not a leading part for Stephen Chow. He has a supporting part. The leading actors are Max Mock and Ellen Chan, and Max Mock is playing a waiter whose best friend is Stephen Chow. Stephen Chow is a member of a triad, but Max Mock wants to have an honest life and doesn't want to get involved in this kind of gangster activities. But because he is friend with Stephen Chow, he always finds himself having to help him, and he cannot resist, and he finds himself involved in those gangster stories despite his best efforts. And during the time of this trouble, he will meet Ellen Chan. Ellen Chan, who is an hostess, but an hostess who doesn't have sex with her client, of course, and they will both fall in love. And that's actually the heart of the film. The film is a love story with a background of triads and hostess club. The Max Mock Ellen Chan couple is actually fairly convincing. I think they do a good job. They are both very good looking, of course, and I think they do a pretty nice couple in the film. But the problem is that it's once again extremely generic. Gangster films, hostess club films have been done to death at this point in Hong Kong cinema in the second half of the 80s. and Lung Fung restaurant has really nothing new to contribute to this kind of environment. So you just have a lot of cliche when it comes to gangsters, when it comes to hostess, and there is really nothing new in Lung Fung restaurant. You can try to cling on the couple made up by Max Mock and Ellen Chan to have some interesting pieces of romance. They do what they can. As I said, I think they are fairly convincing and they are nice to watch. But the relationship is still quite artificial, not because of their performance, but because the script doesn't really help them to make it as convincing as it should and as unique as it should. And by not managing to really have a convincing romance and to have anything really new in the equation, Punman Kit unfortunately doesn't deliver a film which is worthwhile. It's a bit of a dud, unfortunately. It's part of the less interesting films in Stephen Chow's filmography. Just a few pieces of trivia though. First, the tea house in which Max Mock is working as a waiter may be familiar for you because it's the same tea house which was used in the opening scenes of Hard Boiled before it was destroyed. So you will find it fairly familiar if you have watched Hard Boiled a couple of times. Also, it's interesting to note that it's the first film in which Mantat and Stephen Chow are working together. Stephen Chow and Mantat would become one of the most successful duo for Hong Kong comedy. But here, of course, as it is not, even if it has a bit of comedy touch, it's not a comedy per se, and the relationship is absolutely not comedic. Actually, Mantat here is playing the head of the triad of Stephen Chow, so there is a bit of a father-son relationship or boss-employee relationship between the two. So that can be interesting if you are used to see the two of them being the comedy, their comedic selves being doing a lot of crazy stuff together. It's interesting to see them in another kind of relationship, in a more hierarchical relationship there. It's also something which I should have touched maybe a bit earlier, but it's hard to watch those dramatic film of Stephen Chow when you are used to him as a comedy genius. You are so used to him doing jokes, doing crazy stuff, that when you are watching those films in which he's playing it straight and in which he's giving some completely dramatic performances, there will always be this comedy influence which will make it hard for you. It's a bit like when you are watching the early films of Leslie Nielsen's career, before he did Naked Guns, before he did Airplane. It's quite tough because you will always expect him to do something funny, something crazy, and you have a bit the same feeling, the same sensations when you are watching those early Stephen Chow films, and so it can be a bit distracting. So in a way, if you are starting in Stephen Chow's career, maybe it's better if you start chronologically watching these early films of him, even if they are not so great for the most part, but at least this way you will be able to appreciate better when he's trying to deliver some serious performances compared to if you have watched already his most famous comedy and you are doing it the other way. You are watching his early films, and then you will quite unavoidably being distracted about his performances because of his comedy influence. Still in 1990, Stephen Chow appeared in another Magnum production, which was Unmatchable Match, directed once again by Park Man-wong. So we have all the ingredients we can expect from a Magnum film production, with a bit of action scenes, kind of a cop story, and of course the usual players when it comes to the actors. But Unmatchable Match is actually a bit better than your average Magnum film production, in my opinion. So the story of the film is Shin Fyon, once again, is at the head of a gang of criminals, and they manage to get a lot of jewelry which they have to sell, and for that they need to use a middleman, and the middleman is Michael Chan. The exchange is going to end up badly, and Michael Chan will find himself with the jewels, and he will be tracked down both by the police and by the gangsters who want to get back their precious merchandise. And in order to know where this precious merchandise is, Stephen Chow, who is an undercover cop, is going to befriend with Michael Chan so that he can extract the information. And as it is often the case with these undercover stories, Stephen Chow is going to realize that Michael Chan is actually a pretty good guy, and will try to help him to escape from this difficult situation. And what makes Unmatchable Match better than your average Magnum film production is that there actually is a very good dynamic between Michael Chan and Stephen Chow. And it's a bit surprising, because when you think of what kind of actor Stephen Chow would interact with the best, I don't think Michael Chan is really the one who comes to the mind first. There are many others who seem to be more fitting for a good duo, but actually it works pretty well. It's interesting to note that Michael Chan around that time was kind of at a turning point in his career. He had been in the 70s playing a lot of kung fu hero or bad guys, mostly bad guys rather than heroes, and in the 80s with those gangster film becoming popular, of course he played a lot of gangsters, and in the 90s he was turning once again, changing a little bit, evolving in his career, and he was doing a more comedy part, and that's the case here in Unmatchable Match. He is at the junction playing both a criminal, but some kind of good-hearted criminal, of course, with a bit of comedy aspect, and there is a lot of funny moments actually between him and Stephen Chow, who is also kind of in this in-between stage of his career, being able to provide some serious drama, but also being funny at the same time. And while it didn't really necessarily work that well in films like He Who Chases After the Wind, or it didn't work that well in Dragon Fight, it works pretty well here with Michael Chan in Unmatchable Match. So it's actually a fairly recommended film in my opinion, because you will have the usual tropes of a Magnum film production. You will see Shin Fyon, you will see the usual actors who were working for the studio back then. You will have a few decent action scenes, and you will have this interesting duo, this interesting dynamic between Michael Chan and Stephen Chow. So yeah, fairly recommended in my book, this Unmatchable Match by Park-Man Wong. A bit in the same spirit as Unmatchable Match is Curry and Pepper, directed by Blackie Ko the same year, 1990. This time Stephen Chow is a cop, and he has for teammate Jackie Chung, and they are really in the pure buddy movie kind of dynamic. They are good friends, and they are always pulling jokes to each other. And it's going to be even more competitive, because they will be the subject of a news report, and so they will be followed by a journalist during the course of their normal work in Sin-Sa Choi. And this journalist is played by Anne Bridgewater, so of course both of them will be interested in her and will compete in order to get her attention. This trio of Jackie Chung, Stephen Chow, Anne Bridgewater is really what makes the film work. They have all a very good chemistry between each other's, and they really managed to make it light-hearted and quite funny most of the time. At the same time, the director being Blackie Ko was a famous Taiwanese stuntman and who became action director at the end of the 70s, early 80s, and then director around the time of Curry and Pepper. Of course, with him involved behind the camera, you also have some solid action scenes, especially one in a supermarket. So you really have all you can expect from this kind of Hong Kong production of the time, with a bit of action, with quite a bit of comedy, with charismatic actors, with nice locations as well, because most of the film is shot in Tsim Sha Tsui, and they really go to all the famous places of the district. And if you go to Hong Kong, or if you have been to Hong Kong, you will recognize actually many familiar places watching Curry and Pepper. So all this combined to make a very entertaining, a very fun film to watch. Maybe it's lacking a little bit of personality, maybe it's not that innovative compared to other more famous directors by like Choi Ark, like John Woo, like Peter Chan, but still quite a decent, quite a solid offering when it comes to this kind of a buddy movie action Hong Kong film. The same year, 1990, Stephen Chow was also in Sleazy Dizzy, directed by Chow Yun. Chow Yun is one of the most famous Hong Kong filmmaker of the 60s. He did a lot for Cantonese cinema by doing youth-oriented films, or also what we call Jane Bond films, so with masked heroines. And then after he moved to Shaw Brothers in the 70s, and he did a lot of Gulong adaptation, wuxia films adapted from the writings of the famous writer Gulong. He did a lot of great films under the Shaw Brothers banner as well. And when Shaw Brothers closed its doors, he kept doing a few films independently, but that was much less successful. Still, he was able to do a few decent films. One of them was A Diary of a Big Man, produced by Choi Ark. And I think Sleazy Dizzy is another which is actually quite solid from him at the end of his career, when at a time where obviously he was not as inspired, not as full of talent and energy as it was at the beginning of his career. But Sleazy Dizzy is fairly entertaining. The story of Sleazy Dizzy is kind of following the template of God of Gambler. So instead of Chow Yun Fat, we have Chen Quan Tai. Chen Quan Tai, who is a virtuous gangster, but who is betrayed during an exchange with another set of criminals, another triad. And he loses his memory, and he is helped by an office lady played by Sibel Hu, and also at some point a small crook, a small thief played by Stephen Chow is going to get involved to find back his memory and of course extract his revenge to the bad triads who have caused him trouble. Quite typical of Hong Kong production at the time. The film is a bit all over the place. You have the gangster aspect, you have the comedy aspect, you have some action scenes quite regularly during the course of the film. It's a bit doing too many things at the same time, but that was kind of a common thing happening in the industry back then. So it's a bit messy, but despite being messy, it's quite fun most of the time, I would say. First, because we have a good performance by Stephen Chow. It's really, we start to see the comedy Stephen Chow with his crazy brand of humor. It's not fully developed yet, but the premise are there. He's in a lot of weird situations, but he always managed to escape through his wit and through a crazy idea. It's not handled the best way possible. The direction of Chow Yun is not as efficient as it could be in order to make the joke more impactful, but still you can see that Stephen Chow is starting to develop his comedy brand there, and that's really for the best. On the other hand, we have Sibel Wu, who is actually quite convincing, playing it for the laugh, playing it comedy style. Sibel Wu at that time was kind of typecast as a girl with guns, so she was doing a lot of serious action film and doing a lot of action, even if she was actually a double for most of those scenes, because she was not a martial artist. And I think she was not necessarily that happy about this typecasting as the girl with gun. And I think she had probably more potential to do comedy, and so she's able here to show this side of her talent to good effect, and that's really an asset for the film, even if she is not to the level of Stephen Chow. And at the same time, we also have some pretty good action scenes directed by Yuen Bun. They are really nicely choreographed, with a bit of comedy put also in there as soon as Stephen Chow is there, as soon as Stephen Chow is involved. He also starts to use some Bruce Lee trademarks, which would be something he would do over and over again in his films. So you can already see him develop that, start with that in Sleazy Dizzy. So it's really a film which is interesting to see for this start of the Stephen Chow comedy. It's all starting there. It was not really his style of humor when he was doing a comedy in Faithfully Yours, when he was doing it in Love is Love, on some others, but here he's really able to put his personality, to put his style in, and even if it's not fully developed, that really elevates Sleazy Dizzy over your average action comedy Hong Kong film of the time. And so for all these reasons, I think Sleazy Dizzy is quite an interesting film to watch, and is fairly recommended if you want to discover further Stephen Chow's career. That's less the case of the next one, which is a Lookout Officer, directed by Lo Sui-tu, which is a full-fledged comedy with a bit of fantastical, with a bit of fantasy element, a ghost comedy in a way, because we have Bill Tung, who is a cop and who is killed after he has found the place, the laboratory in which they were doing some drug trafficking, and so he is coming back to Earth as a ghost in order to put an end to this traffic. And so for that, he's going to use Stephen Chow, a young cop, as his partner. It's basically the same concept as his Where's Officer Tuba, a Sammo Hung production with Sammo Hung, directed by Ricky Lo and Philip Chan. And to be honest, I think Where's Officer Tuba is a very fun Hong Kong action ghost comedy, and much better than a Lookout Officer. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what goes wrong with a Lookout Officer, because the casting is quite nice. We have Stanley Fung, we have Bill Tung, and we have Stephen Chow. Stephen Chow is already, as I said, like in Sleazy Dizzy, starting to have his brand of comedy there. So you have a few good jokes, you have a few good comedy scenes. There is one with the gun when he's trying to seduce a girl. You can already guess what is happening with his gun. There is also a scene in which he is having an argument with his kind of his father-in-law, played by Stanley Fung, and they are having a dinner, but they cannot show the daughter of Stanley Fung, which Stephen Chow wants to court. They cannot show that they hate each other, so they are doing things during the dinner, kind of fighting against each other, but pretending they are not. A bit like Dirty O, the Lo Kar-leung film, but more for laugh than for the choreographic performance in the film by Lo Sifu. And so there are scenes like this which are quite fun and which may get you a smile or a laugh. But otherwise, the rest of the film is a bit dull and a bit cheap also. It doesn't look like the budget was really there, and it shows during the course of the film. And the rhythm is not well handled as well. It's not as fast paced as it should. There is probably a bit too much of romance. Biltung as the lead. I like Biltung, but maybe that was not the best choice, and we have maybe too many scenes with him, and it should have concentrated probably a bit more on Stephen Chow and given him more leeway, given him more freedom to elaborate on some jokes, on some of the comedy scenes. And because it didn't do that, the film, while it's not bad, I mean, we are not at the level of He Who Chases After the Wind or Faithfully Yours or Love is Love or Lung Fung Restaurant. It's still a watchable film. It kind of missed the target. You feel there was potential for much better comedy than the one which is being shown there, and that's a little bit disappointing. Still watchable, still there are enough comedy scenes which are successful that you will be quite entertained, but you will be frustrated at the same time because you will see that the concept was there to do much more than that. But at last, in 1990, we at last reach the first real, very successful comedy by Stephen Chow, and this comedy is All for the Winner, directed by Jeff Lowe and Corey Yun. So All for the Winner is a kind of a spin-off. It's a parody, actually, of God of Gamblers. God of Gamblers, directed by Wong Jing with Chow Yun-fat and Andy Lau, was a big success. And it was so much a success that many films tried to follow in its footsteps. And All for the Winner took the orientation of doing a parody of it. And so in it we have Stephen Chow playing a young immigrant from mainland China, who has a superpower, who has some kind of psychic powers, and is going to meet his uncle in Hong Kong. And this uncle will realize that he has this kind of powers, and he will put them to his benefit by using Stephen Chow in all kind of gamblings, so that he can use these powers in order to earn a lot of money for himself. And that will lead to Stephen Chow entering some kind of international tournament in which he will be confronted by a very evil businessman and gambler played by Paul Chun. So as I said, here we really have all the ingredients we can expect from a Stephen Chow comedy. We have a duo with Mantat and Stephen Chow. We have a lot of crazy idea, a lot of parodies, a lot of delirious, absurd elements of comedy. We have many familiar actors. So aside from Mantat, we also have Changman. We also have Sandra actors who will work very well with Stephen Chow. Behind the camera, we have Jeff Lowe, who is really able to adopt a superior mise en scène in order to really highlight the jokes of Stephen Chow. And we also have Corey Yun, who is able to deliver, of course, some pretty solid, pretty good action scenes, while incorporating also the comedy chop of Stephen Chow. So all this combined together to really make for a very successful comedy. You have a lot of extremely funny scenes. There are, for example, when Stephen Chow enters the tournament, he is still in this parody of the God of Gamblers, and so when he enters in slow motion, but it's not a slow motion made for the film. It's actually him moving in slow motion, and you will see people around him moving at normal speed, and he will keep doing it. And the way he does it is really hilarious. He really has this body language. He really has a lot of expressions, strong expressions, the faces he makes, which are really super funny. And he has this duo with Mantat, who is also prone to overacting, but it works in the kind of universe which is being described, which is being played out in All for the Winners. And of course, being one of the very first, very successful Stephen Chow comedy, it's a must-see for any Stephen Chow fan. It will be quite influential, of course, for some of the next films we will discuss. It's a really very, very funny film, very funny comedy. It's better if you have watched God of Gamblers so that you can understand some of the references. But still, even if you are not that familiar with the Wong Jing film, you will be able to appreciate it because there will be a lot of crazy idea. There will be also some quite good action scenes. The Korean mark is there through the part of Chungman, a quite strong woman lead. So yeah, if you are interested in Stephen Chow or if you want to discover his filmography, All for the Winner is really a must-watch. The same year as All for the Winner, Stephen Chow was also in When Fortune Smiles, directed by Anthony Chan. Anthony Chan is a member of The Winner. The Winners were one of the most popular pop band from Hong Kong in the 70s. There were also Alan Tam and Kenny B in it, and Anthony Chan was the drummer, and he became a fairly successful actor, but mostly working as a producer and director. And When Fortune Smiles is one of those crazy concepts when it comes to its story. We have a tycoon who is dying and whose heritage will go to his daughter who is far in Europe. And so the son of this tycoon, who is jealous not to have been the recipient of the heritage, is going to look for a lookalike of his sister, and he will find one who is a garbage lady and who is going to take the place of his sister so that he can get all the money. And at the same time, someone else will try to get the money from the rich tycoon, and he will hire Stephen Chow, a small crook, so that he can seduce the daughter and get the money through a wedding. So quite a complicated concept there, but in a way it's quite similar to what Cinema City was doing also at the time. It has a bit of this Cinema City vibe, the films with Raymond Wong and Karl Maka, with some quite improbable original concepts. So there is a bit the same vibe there and the same kind of comedy, but at the same time as there is Stephen Chow there, you also have some more absurd, some more nonsense style comedy, and so that you have both sides. It's once again a film which is at the juncture of two time for Hong Kong cinema, the more old school 80s comedy style on one hand, on the other hand the more 90s Moleto Stephen Chow style of comedy. So if you like both style of comedy, you will find When Fortune Smiles pretty entertaining. If you are more into one and less into the other, that will be a more difficult watch, but you should have enough of one of the style of comedy you like in order to find it enjoyable enough, at least. Compared to All for the Winner, of course, When Fortune Smiles is really one level below. But still, I would say it's a decent comedy. It's completely watchable. It's quite fun. Alongside Stephen Chow, we have Sandra Ng, we have Anthony Wong, so they are good actors and they work pretty well with him. The ending has quite an interesting fight scene on a boat, which is very cartoony in some aspects. When Stephen Chow is fighting against Billy Chow, there are really some cartoon elements, and it makes for a fun action scene. So all in all, When Fortune Smiles is a decent comedy. It's not as good as All for the Winner. It's not his best comedy for sure, but still quite watchable. We are still in 1990 with a Triad Story directed by Chow, who is a supporting actor who appeared in a lot of films during the 80s and who tried his hand at directing as well, and so Triad Story is one of the few films he did as a director. It's especially noteworthy because that's the last time for Stephen Chow to play a serious part, to play in a dramatic film. And a Triad Story, as the title implies, is once again a gangster story, once again a film which is at the end of the trend of the heroic bloodshed. We have Oh Chun-Hung, who plays the former leader of a triad. He was in prison and he finally got out of prison and finds back his family and his followers. But he wants to end up his criminal career, and he wants to have an honest life and to reconnect with his family. His son is played by Stephen Chow, and he has a good relationship with him, but unfortunately for him, his daughter is very resentful and she doesn't want to reconnect with him, and she's also involved in a relationship with a young triad leader who is very abusive towards her and who is also completely dismissive about his former triad credential, and so that will put them on a collision course at some point, the old triad people against this young punk. The storyline is pretty classic, but it works fairly well, especially because we have very good actors. We have really good performances from the whole cast. Oh Chun-Hung, with a Taiwanese actor originally, has been in many films. I think he's a very solid actor. He is really able to bring all the sadness and the nobility in a way of his characters, his followers. We have Shumwai, we have Wuma, we have Xingfion, we have Mantat. So they are all very good supporting actors, and they are all very fitted in their respective parts. Stephen Chow is also convincing as this good son who is trying to help his father. So the whole cast is really nice. We also have a duo of killer played by Eddie Maher and Hachi Chun, who really have an interesting personality, and they really help to bring something interesting in the film. We also have Billy Cho, who is playing a good guy part for a change. So that's interesting to see him in this kind of role, which is not that often in his filmography. So the cast really so the cast is really a big asset for the film. The story, as I said, is fairly conventional, but it works pretty well. And at the same time, you also have a lot of action scenes and very tough, very violent, and so it's quite quite well done. So the recipe really works as a serious drama with some flash of violent action. Triad Story is quite recommended. It's too bad though that Stephen Chow in this one is once again dubbed by another actor, and I think it doesn't help to elevate his performance. His performance is good. He's doing a good job, as I said, but if it had its own voice, I think it would have been probably one level higher. And it's especially disturbing because the actor who dubbed Stephen Chow is actually the actor who also dubbed Sammo Hung around that time. And when you are able to connect it, it's a bit distracting. It doesn't really help to make his performance convincing. But despite this problem, he still has a good acting. He still has an interesting, serious, dramatic performance here. And the film itself is a good, small triad gangster production which is certainly worth a look. And last film for this year, 1990, which as you can see was a very busy year for Stephen Chow, is a return to the world of gambling after All for the Winners with God of Gamblers 2, directed by Wong Jing. So Wong Jing had seen the incredible success of All for the Winner, and he wanted to take advantage of it for his own God of Gamblers series, and so he chose to use All for the Winner, to incorporate All for the Winner into his own official God of Gambler series, and that's the result, God of Gambler 2, with Stephen Chow and Andy Lau. So we don't have Chow Yun-fat. Chow Yun-fat doesn't come back. Maybe he was too expensive or he was too busy, and so instead we have Stephen Chow with Mantat, of course, having to collaborate with Andy Lau in this film. So Stephen Chow is playing exactly the same character as he was playing in All for the Winner. So this mainland immigrant who has psychic power, and he wants to learn from the best. So he wants to learn from the God of Gambler, from Chow Yun-fat. But Chow Yun-fat not being in the film, he has to deal with Andy Lau instead. And so the dynamic of the film will be between the two. And I think that's a bit the problem of the film. If it had been a collaboration between Chow Yun-fat and Stephen Chow, I think that would have been quite interesting. But the dynamic between Andy Lau and Stephen Chow is not that great. And I think the problem comes from Andy Lau. Andy Lau back then was really in his idol type of performances. He was very about his good look. He was very concerned about things like this, and he was not that good with comedy. I think with time he evolved, and now he would be certainly able to do a good job. But back then he was not fully developed when it comes to comedy, and he was always a bit too serious, I think, for this kind of films. And that's a bit of a problem in his duo with Stephen Chow. And that's also a bit the problem of the film. It's the two universes, despite one being the parody of the others, the two universes don't really blend as harmoniously as we would like them to. So it feels sometimes like you are watching a God of Gambler film when it comes to Andy Lau and the other regulars from the franchise. And at the same time, you have more like All for the Winner film. And so it's like two films made in one, but they don't really combine. And so if you like one of more than the others, of course you will be happy. For me, for example, I prefer... I'm not very fond of God of Gamblers. I much prefer All for the Winner. I much prefer the Stephen Chow style of comedy. So each time there is a Stephen Chow Mantat on the screen, I find it funny and I like it. But as soon as we move to Andy Lau, I find it much less convincing. And so in God of Gamblers 2, there are some funny scenes, especially some turning around noodles. There are a lot of stupid comedic scenes with noodles, which I find are quite hilarious, sometimes with the Mantat, sometimes with Stephen Chow. So all these scenes, I really like them and I really find it funny. But I think the more conventional God of Gambler universe and structure on usual gags work much less than the more crazy side, the more crazy All for the Winner side of the film. And so at the end it's a mixed offering there. It's still a recommendation. It's still entertaining enough for you to have a good time, but this combination of the two universes, this combination of Wong Jing style of comedy and Stephen Chow style of comedy is not working as well as it should be or as it will be in the future, as we will see later on. Still, Wong Jing and Stephen Chow kept working together, and in 1991 they did Tricky Brains with once again Andy Lau involved. Tricky Brains is the birth date of the Trickster films. So what are the Trickster films? The tricksters are people who are hired in order to shame somebody. So there are people they're like jokers. There are people who are specialized in making stupid jokes, and they will be hired by someone in order to shame somebody important, in order to destroy their reputation by humiliating them by doing this kind of stupid jokes, so that they will appear ridiculous, and then their reputation will be destroyed, and they will have to to go elsewhere to hide themselves forever. So that's the concept of the trickster, and that's something which Wong Jing would use regularly in his production. He would bring back this concept, and I think actually it's a very good concept. I think it's a very good idea, and it opens the door for a lot of jokes and a lot of funny moments. But unfortunately, this trickster concept was never fully used, in my opinion. It was never exploited to its full potential, and that's a bit the case here in Tricky Brain. So in the film, Stephen Chow is of course the trickster, and is hired by Wisely in order to shame Andy Lau, who is an employee in a company and who is in love with Rosamund Kwan, but he doesn't realize that Rosamund Kwan is the daughter of the president of the company, and she's working there undercover in a way, in order to learn the rope of the trade, and of course by being in love with Andy Lau, Andy Lau would become the heir of the company, and Wisely doesn't want that to happen. He wants to benefit, he wants to become the next president, and so he wants to make sure that Rosamund Kwan will be with him and not with Andy Lau. So that's the storyline. And so while the introduction of Stephen Chow as the trickster, doing a lot of pranks to Xing Fuan, is very efficient, it's very well done, and it's very funny. As soon as we move to this Stephen Chow having to trick Andy Lau story, I think it works much less. First, it's overlong, it's way too long. It becomes also quite like a typical white collar comedy on some aspect, with a lot of prank in the office, office politics going on. I mean, it's a bit overdone, with too many characters, and it doesn't concentrate enough on Stephen Chow's ideas, on Stephen Chow's pranks and tricks. So when it does, the film works fairly well, but once again, a bit the same phenomenon with God of Gamblers 2, when we are more on Andy Lau, when we are more on this romance between him and Rosamund Kwan, it drags down the film a bit. It's not really helping the comedy. The film itself is pretty long. I mean, it's almost 2 hours long, and it's maybe too much for a film like this. So the trickster aspect kind of loses some of its steam. Also, Wong Jing is a little bit too obvious when it comes to the jokes. There are a lot of cartoon noise during the jokes, which makes it a bit too in the nose, in my opinion. And the music also is very cartoony, way too cartoony, in my opinion. It really makes it very, very obvious, and it doesn't actually help to elevate the jokes. It makes it too obvious, and that doesn't help. So while there are some good ideas, while the concept is great, and while there are, as usual with Stephen Chow, some good jokes there and there are some really funny moments in Tricky Brains. The other aspects of the story, of the actors, of the Wong Jing style, in my opinion, don't play to the benefit of the film, and they don't make Tricky Brain a classic of Stephen Chow comedy. Once again, like God of Gamblers 2, they are enough for it to be decent and to be entertaining and to be worth a watch if you are a Stephen Chow fan, but it's not as successful, it's not as fun as a movie like All for the Winner. In 1991, Stephen Chow also appeared in the last Magnum film production for Danny Lee, which was Legend of the Dragon, directed by Lee Lik-chi and Danny Lee. Let's make it clear first, from what I gathered, the information I was able to gather, Danny Lee didn't direct much of the film, and the film was mostly directed by Lee Lik-chi, which was quite a common practice for Danny Lee back then. He did the same with Dr. Lamb, which was in fact directed by Billy Tang and not by himself. But it seems for marketing reasons that was a good thing to do. So same happened here in Legend of the Dragon. And so in Legend of the Dragon we have similar aspects to All for the Winner on Love is Love. So Stephen Chow this time is not from mainland, but is from the New Territory, from Taiho, which is a small village at the extreme west of Lanto Island, and he is a part of a kung fu school. His father is Yunhua, and he has a real talent for snooker, and that's something which will be used by his uncle, who is not played by Mantat in this case, but who is played by Lankarian. And so the uncle will bring him to the big town, to the heart of Hong Kong, in order to take advantage of his talent and get a lot of money. So same concept, as I said, as All for the Winner, with a bit of Love is Love, because Stephen Chow is also involved with his sweetheart, his childhood sweetheart, played by Teresa Mo. Teresa Mo is a very good actually comedy actress, very good actress in general, and so there is a good chemistry between them as this childhood couple. But Legend of the Dragon is a mixed bag once again, because obviously it's no more your average Magnum cop story. Danny Lee at that point had understood that the forte, the talent of Stephen Chow was in comedy, and so A Legend of the Dragon is tailor-made for him as a comedy, but it's not as crazy as you would like it to be. It's not as crazy as All for the Winner, God of Gamblers 2, or Tricky Brains. It's a bit more low-key, a bit more down-to-earth, and maybe that makes for, in a way, that creates some kind of personality of its own. But it probably would have been even better if Stephen Chow had gone a bit more crazy, if he had been able to really go full range of his comedy talent and make the most of the situations. There is still many comedy scenes which work. It's still a good movie to watch, especially because of the different interaction he has with his father, played by Yunhua. Yunhua is really good in comedy, especially with the interactions with Teresa Mo, because as I say, she's a very good comedy actress as well. So there are some good moments there and there sprinkled in a film, but it could have been better than that. Once again, that's one of those cases where you feel like there was potential for much more than what is being delivered. The film is important though for two other elements. First, once more, we have a lot of Bruce Lee references. So I already talked about Sleazy Dizzy, in which Stephen Chow was using Bruce Lee references. He did a bit of the same in All for the Winners. He put a lot of Bruce Lee references when it came to the action scenes. And here there are even more in Legend of the Dragon, with the character of Yunhua, who was a Bruce Lee stuntman, which was the case for Yunhua himself. And this Bruce Lee legacy once again will be developed in some other film, but so Legend of the Dragon is a part of this process of having even more Bruce Lee references in Stephen Chow films. And the other important aspect in Stephen Chow's career for Legend of the Dragon is the collaboration with Lee Lik-chi. Lee Lik-chi behind the scene would become one of the most important directors for Stephen Chow. He would be one of the two with Jeff Lowe, director who would be able to really use Stephen Chow as its fullest. But that's not yet the case in Legend of the Dragon, but it will happen in the subsequent film they would do together. And we will finish this retrospective, this first part of Stephen Chow retrospective, with The Top Bet, directed by Jeff Lowe and Corey Yun, which is a spin-off variation on All for the Winner. So we have once again the duo responsible for All for the Winner, and we have Stephen Chow exactly at the end of All for the Winner. He has won this competition against Paul Chun, but he is not going to stay for the film, so he only has a small cameo at the beginning and at the very end of the film, and he will instead go all over the world. He will travel in order to learn more about gambling, so that's a way to get rid of him, obviously. And his shoes are going to be filled by Anita Mui, who is his sister, the sister of Stephen Chow's character, who is also from the mainland and who has also the same psychic power, and she's going to be sent by the Communist Party to Hong Kong to bring back Stephen Chow, because Stephen Chow is not supposed to use his power for this kind of personal gains. And so Anita Mui is much more faithful, much more respecting the directive of the Communist Party in China, and so she's going to go there in order to bring him back, and she will meet, of course, Mantat, the uncle of Stephen Chow, and her uncle as well, but she will refuse to be used the same way as Stephen Chow was. And in a dynamic which is actually more reminiscent of God of Gamblers 2 than All for the Winner, we will also have a small-time crook played by Dudu Cheng, who will be involved and who will kind of team up with Mantat and Anita Mui, even if Anita Mui doesn't want to, and who will be involved in this kind of gambling competition. So to be more precise, the character of Anita Mui is a mix of the one played by Stephen Chow in All for the Winner and a mix of the one played by Dudu Cheng in Her Fatal Ways. Her Fatal Ways was a very successful comedy at the end of the 80s, directed by Alfred Chung, in which Dudu was playing this kind of stereotypical mainland brainwashed communist who was still kind of living in the Cultural Revolution and who would find herself in modern Hong Kong, and that would generate a lot of gags and jokes. So that was very successful, and Anita Mui is playing a mix of that character and the one played by Stephen Chow in All for the Winner, which is kind of ironic because we have Dudu here, who is the one who has created this character, but here she is doing another style of comedy, another style of character, who is closer to Andy Lau in God of Gamblers 1 and 2. So if you have liked All for the Winner, there is a good chance you will like The Top Bet as well. There are some good comedy scenes, especially when it comes to Dudu during during the climax of the film, where she has to face Paul Chun, and she has to delay for Anita Mui to come to the rescue, and she is doing a lot of crazy, funny delaying tactics. So there are some good scenes. There is also a parody of Long Arm of the Law with Kenny B, which is quite funny. Quite a few funny scenes there and there, but all in all, it's not as good as All for the Winner. We have to be honest about that. The Top Bet is at least 1 or 2 levels below the quality of All for the Winner, and I think the main reason for that is Anita Mui. Anita Mui actually would prove that she can be a very good comedy actress later on in her career, and we will see that in some other films during this retrospective. But back then she was still a bit green. She was not completely at ease, maybe because the character was not really created by her originally. It was created, as I said, by Dudu and by Stephen Chow, and so it feels like she's not completely at ease there, and so she's not able to deliver when it comes to comedy as as much as we would like her to do. It's not as good as what Dudu or what Stephen Chow was doing with this character. And maybe the directors realized that, and that's why they chose to concentrate a bit more on the character played by Dudu, who is completely at ease when it comes to comedy, and so more comedy is on her side, at least I would say, during the 2/3 of the film. And so she does a good job. She brings good comedy, but it's not as inspired as for All for the Winner. So if you have liked the gambling film, if you have liked All for the Winner, and if you are fond of all this gambling film, The God of Gamblers, this gambling comedy, the Top Bet is still a recommended viewing. You should still have a look at it. There are also a good supporting actors with Paul Chun, with Yunhua, who is exactly like his part in Eastern Condors. You also have Lo Shun, you have Corey Yun, you have a lot of good performing supporting actors there, and there is enough comedy, enough funny scenes for you to have a good time. But yeah, watch it if you like this gambling scene, watch it if you like all these actors, but expect it to be a lesser effort compared to All for the Winner. And so that's it for this first part of the Stephen Chow retrospective. We will stop in the middle of his year 91. The second part will be arguably the peak of Stephen Chow comedy career from the middle of 91 until around 95. I hope you have found this first part interesting. I hope you will be interested to look at some of the films I've talked about, and don't hesitate, as usual, to ask questions, to make comments about my observations. You can of course disagree with me. Feel free to express yourself, and I will see you again very soon in another video of the House of Asian Cinema. Until then, take care.